Humanity often regards itself as the most intelligent and resourceful species on the planet. Not many other animals are known to create fire, build complex structures and machinery, if any at all. However, the ability and complexity of these structures and machines has grown exponentially. And the fire? It's mostly been replaced by technologies we only started to understand in the past 200 years. Technology that has given humans access to unbelievable energy, the ability to instantly send information from anywhere, and even the ability to exit the Earth's atmosphere. This rapid influx of new and ever-complex technologies is often associated with the Industrial Revolution and the Second Agricultural Revolution. Just how the First Agricultural Revolution allowed societies to settle down and build large cities that could support thousands if not millions of people, this Industrial Revolution made way for and created an incentive for people to study the natural world in order to further accelerate the discovery of new technologies. Nevertheless, society's hunger for more would lead to an unforeseen catastrophe that would be centuries in the making, and further pushed by the fact that a growing dependence on technologies that affected our world in, at the time, unknown ways. This would dig humanity into a hole so deep that one might say you'd have a better chance digging to the other side than climbing back up. It was 1760 when Britain began to have an explosion of new machines that would allow for rapid production of various goods, or even the harvesting or transport of resources through the steam engine. None would have as great of an effect on the labor and economy of the time as the spinning jenny, which was invented by James Hargreaves. This invention would lead to a series of similar machines either for textiles or different industries. Now, James did not cause global warming, and spinning jenny would become a symbol for a new kind of world, a world of factory work and mass production. Before this, textiles were a tedious and difficult process that needed to be done by hand, and it quite literally led to massive trade routes such as the Silk Road in order to get access to better textiles and better methods of producing them. This could of course be said about everything else before the 18th century, before trains and steel production for larger and more complex buildings, such as the skyscrapers of today. However, by the 20th century, previously non-industrialized countries such as China and India, and especially the Soviet Union, began to flourish as well. The Industrial Revolution introduced vital technologies such as electricity, developments in communication and transportation, and the synthesization of new materials and their mass production. The fruits of this revolution are still present today in widely used commodities. This makes it all sound great, and it was up until the realization that the world was advancing so fast that it didn't quite respect or understand the consequences of so much new technology. Air quality had become abysmal. A lot of coal was necessary to run certain machines and trains. Wars had an unprecedented level of mortality. Soldiers were still used to the classic styles of warfare that implied charging in with large waves of troops and fighting the opponent head-on, rather than the smaller skirmishes and guerrilla warfare of today. The incredibly high mortality rate of the American Civil War and the first two world wars is generally attributed to industrialization and the modern weaponry that came with it. The soldiers of those times simply weren't prepared for it. Labor conditions almost immediately worsened. The inventions of machines and light bulbs meant that workers could be kept working in terrible conditions for hours on end. sometimes up to even 16 hours, 6 days a week, and without paid holidays or vacations. It was not uncommon to find children as young as 5 years old working said machines, and iron workers would find themselves working at 130 degrees Fahrenheit or more each day. It wouldn't be until 1926 that the car manufacturer Henry Ford would enact a 40-hour working week with weekends off, and that would be the start of the modern work week. It began at this time, and it was considered quite revolutionary at the time. This was after the First Great War, though, and even after the first airplanes were invented. Even though factory owners were producing more than they would ever need with their new machines, they still refused to give people a fair work week. Aside from the aforementioned atrocities felt by workers in cities of the time, nothing would come close to the effects of plastics and oil, especially as it became more and more evident that the earth and its oceans were beginning to suffer from these abuses. The first prototype of plastic was invented in 1869 by Wesley Hyatt, calling his revolutionary new product celluloid. With the accessibility and low cost of this new material, plastic not only offered a more viable alternative for materials, but made it typically expensive commodities accessible to the lower class. The inexpensiveness and potential for mass production of plastic grew when another plastic material, bakelite, was invented in 1907 by Leo Baekeland. The invention of plastic played a large role in the development of American society. The material's cheapness and versatility made it crucial to scientific and technological developments, such as the invention of safety mechanisms for cars and later on the development of high-powered computers. Thanks to the creation of this synthetic material, the standard of living improved substantially in just the last 50 years. However, as living conditions improved, climate conditions only worsened. As of now, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization estimates over 220 million tons of plastic are produced each year. This ultimately leads to the death of over 1 million birds each year and 100,000 marine mammals. It's impossible to talk about the worsening climate, though, without mentioning oil. As the 20th century progressed and technological development flourished, oil was frequently used as a primary source of energy, specifically for electricity in automobiles. Both of these commodities increased the necessity of oil as fuel, and thus demand for it grew exponentially. Oil allowed factories and countries to sustain an even greater demand for energy. This inevitably led to wars being fought over the control of this resource, either as a way to win the war or as something that could be won from the war. This isn't the only way oil has taken lives, but the catastrophic oil spills that often kill 500,000 birds worldwide each year. Just the 2010 Gulf of Mexico oil spill killed 82,000 birds across 102 species, 6,000 turtles, and nearly 26,000 marine mammals, not to mention the untold effects this could have on the ability for phytoplankton to photosynthesize. Plankton may just seem like regular old microorganisms, but 70% of the Earth's oxygen comes from these creatures, all of which are in the oceans. Arguments can be made about plants, trees, and the quality of air, but none of it will ever matter if we just single-handedly destroy 70% of the planet's oxygen production. Just for reference, 2 billion years ago, life on Earth did not survive off oxygen, most of which was still just early forms of bacteria and microorganisms, but ultimately ended up leading to one of the first mass extinctions in Earth's history and paved the way for multicellular life that now depends on oxygen. If a few species of cyanobacteria were capable of causing a mass extinction with just the fact that they were producing too much oxygen, then there's no reason to believe humans can't do that either. If anything, they could top it and do something even worse if they aren't already. Even things like nuclear energy aren't this devastating to the environment, if at all. Nuclear energy accounts for 10% of the world's energy consumption, 20% if we're looking at the US. Yet, it only accounts for 0.07 deaths per terawatt hour of energy across the globe, while fossil fuels account for 99% of these deaths. This means oil alone kills 18 people prematurely each year, while it would take 14 years for nuclear energy production to kill just one person. As of today, the oil industry is worth $2.1 trillion, playing a substantial role in the US's economy as well as around the world. Aside from being used as the fuel of choice, oil was used as an additive in many other products. For example, common household items such as crayons, dyes, clothing, cleaners, and much more. Unfortunately, oil is seen as essential for industrialization to developing nations, and with developed nations pushing them to not use it, although hypocritically having used it themselves, to build the necessary replacements like nuclear energy, which is also another unfortunate matter because we're decommissioning reactors rather than building them. Also, hydroelectric dams, wind farms, and solar farms, it seems it could be difficult to stop its use unless the world came together and shared technology or resources for building sustainable forms of energy. So, what can be done, you might be asking? Well, for one, our world isn't without solutions. We don't need a fancy wonder technology to replace oil. We already have access to modern reactors that can avoid catastrophes like Chernobyl, and often hundreds are running at a time without people even realizing the amount of energy they're providing. There are obviously geographically based solutions like wind farms or hydroelectric dams, but at least in the US, relying solely on wind farms and solar farms could be more costly and damaging to the environment. You'd have to build thousands of electrical transmission networks and revamp the electrical infrastructure of the US alone in order to move clean energy from the locations that can produce it to the locations that need it. This would cost trillions, and it simply isn't practical for most countries or the US. So personally, I say nuclear is a solid solution that we've come to understand very well, and luckily you can always recycle and bury nuclear waste, unlike CO2, which just gets released into the air. Nuclear materials are sitting in the ground regardless, so putting it back in the ground once we've utilized them won't make much of a difference to our environment if handled responsibly. As for all of the plastic in the ocean, well, that's precisely why I and a whole bunch of other YouTubers have teamed up to get viewers like you to donate $1 to remove 1 pound of plastic from our rivers, seas, and beaches. You'd be saving tons of marine life and playing a direct role. This isn't just you and me, but millions of others that could chip in just $1 to remove millions of pounds together. We can't easily get CO2 out of the air, but we can definitely pick up all the trash we've left in our oceans. The oceans that give us the air we breathe and the food we eat. Today's video was a bit of a special one since I'm participating in the ongoing #teamseas event. I hope the information in this video or any other videos really that will be uploaded today motivate you to donate even just $1 to start putting a dent in our fight against climate change and pollution. I promised to release the second part to the MCI WorldCom video today, but I thought it would be more important to help out with this first, and I was planning on doing a video on climate change anyways. However, that second part video will be up by next Friday, so stay tuned for it.